In February 1977, two manufacturers launched in the UK two models that were introduced into new market segments for those manufacturers. Volvo introduced the 343, which was a smaller car for them, and Ford introduced the Fiesta as a super mini. Both of these cars represented quite a departure for the manufacturer, and so I thought, given that I have both of them in my collection for now, that I should do a little bit of a comparison and have a look at what was new for 77. Both the Fiesta and the 343 probably have more in common than you might think. They were initially launched in 1976 in mainland Europe in left-hand drive form, but it took until February 1977 for them both to be launched in right-hand drive form in the UK. They both were only also available as three-door hatchbacks. And bear in mind that in February 1977 a hatchback was a very newfangled thing, so both of these were pretty cutting edge for both of these manufacturers. Ford were desperate to get into the super mini game. Cars were getting smaller and they didn't have a product that would compete with things like the Fiat 127, which was incredibly popular. And so Project Bobcat became the Ford Fiesta, a small front-wheel drive super mini that became an instant hit, and was a hit for several decades in fact, in different generations. Volvo 343 on the other hand was perhaps a little bit of a mark of desperation for Volvo. They made large family cars and executive cars that were quite thirsty, and in the early 1970s there was an oil crisis, and so there was a search for more fuel efficient cars. Volvo, being a pretty small manufacturer in comparison to Ford, couldn't develop their own small car, but knew that the Dutch car company DAF were in the process of developing a new replacement for their 66 model. And so Volvo in fact bought a controlling share in DAF and took over the development of what would be the DAF 77, and Volvoified it a little bit and launched it as the Volvo 343. And the 343's DAF origins can't be ignored in the early days. It was only available with DAF's patented continuously variable transmission called Variomatic. And as you'll see in a moment when we have a look around the insides of the cars, this car very much is still a DAF in a lot of ways. Both of these cars probably would have been a choice in 1977 for a similar sort of market, perhaps a single person, a small family, or as a second car for a family that had a larger car for sort of longer trips. The two cars are of course in different classes of car. This is a super mini and the 343 is a small family car, but they are still small three-door hatchbacks, and by today's standards they're both actually incredibly tiny. Let's have a look at what the Fiesta would have cost you to start with. So Motor Magazine from February 77 tested the L against several other super minis, and they show it that it would have cost you £2,079 plus the cost for a brake servo and a rear wash wipe, both of which this car has fitted. This is a 1980 car. It's slightly later than the launch spec, but it is pretty much identical. Autocar tested the Volvo 343 in February 1977, and according to them, the car would have cost you a total of £3,455, which is significantly more expensive than the Fiesta. Is the extra cost of the 343 justified? Well, Autocar weren't convinced that it was, but let's have a look at both of them and see what you get from one to the other, and whether actually the 343 isn't as bad value for money as Autocar thought. Opening the chrome handle of the Fiesta reveals quite a light door, which has a simple-ish door card and some body-coloured metal still on show. We get a door pocket, we get a window winder, we get a dinky little door handle and a door pull. Inside we get these rather nicely trimmed seats with the red houndstooth with no headrests and only 5-point adjustability on them. So there's only 5 positions which you can have the backrest, which probably, to be fair, is enough for most people to find the right one for them. We have got a flat rear bench seat with no seat belts. Looking at the fascia of the Fiesta, we get a very sort of hard plastic moulded dashboard. It's actually quite pleasant. It's made of sort of brown plastic. The instrument cluster is very simple. We have a speedometer, a fuel gauge, temperature gauge, and a few warning lights. That's oil, pressure, I think that's the brake one, even though it's not marked, indicators on one bulb, main beams, and alternator charging. And above that we get a very big pattern to tell you what the shift pattern is, which gives away the fact that this is a 4-speed manual with 3 pedals, as you can see over there. The secondary controls are down in the middle here. We have some sliders for the heater controls. We have a reasonably large sized ashtray, and all the other minor controls are on switches. So you've got heated rear window, rear wash wipe, fog light, fan and hazard lights. We have an open glove area for you to store some stuff, but not a lockable glove box. In terms of ventilation, we have an air vent on both sides of the dashboard, we have windscreen ventilation, and we have some fresh air to the face in the middle. On this L model we do get this quite nice satin metal insert into the dashboard, which does kind of lift it a little bit, and also around the instrument cluster itself. We get a 2-spoke steering wheel, which is quite nice to feel. It's quite rubbery on the outside. The left-hand side has a horn and indicators and a manual choke, of course, down there. And on the right-hand side, we've got the wipers and the light controls on the back stalk over there. All nice and straightforward. We get a dimmable rearview mirror, one courtesy light, a couple of sun visors, perforated headlining, and a passenger grab handle. There's also quarter lights on the front windows which don't open, although the very, very posh models do have them opening. Turning to the rear of the Fiesta, we see that we've got a rear wash wipe on this particular model, the L, and the tailgate opens by sticking the key in the lock and twisting it to unlock it, and it then opens to reveal a reasonably shallow boot, but it does have a storage cubby underneath, and the parcel shelf and the backrest fold together and fold flat to make a nice big flat load area for bigger bits and pieces. Let's have a look then at what you get in the 343. I apologise in advance, this car has a different coloured bonnet. The original bonnet for the car was incredibly rusty, so I've replaced it with a scrap part that needs to be repainted to match the rest of the car. Anyway, taking that aside, let's look at what we get. So the 343, you can see immediately, is that little bit more luxurious, because to start with you get 2 door mirrors, one on the passenger side over there and one on the driver's side. To get into the car we have another chrome door handle which lifts up nicely, and the door opens to reveal a much more solid feel to the door, I have to say. But again, a very straightforward and simple door card. This one doesn't even have a door pocket, it's just kind of very, very plain vinyl with just a sort of melted stripes into it. There is no body coloured metal on show though, which is a difference from the Fiesta, which does make it feel a tad more luxurious. The elephant in the room with this car, of course, is that it is a left-hand drive car. The reason that it is left-hand drive is that the launch spec 343 was only produced for one model year. In September 1977, the 78 model year came along, and that had major revisions to the trim and the outside, and all the interior had been completely revised. And so the original 343 was only sold in the UK from February 77 until about September. So very, very few of them were sold, only probably about 2,000 from the research I've done over the years. And so none of those survive as far as I'm aware. I've looked for about 15 to 20 years and not a single British right-hand drive 1977 model 343 survives. So I have about 10 years ago sourced this car from the Netherlands because I really wanted the original guise of the 343 with its quirks and its original dashboard, the original seats. So yeah, that's why this is not a British car, I'm afraid. Looking inside the 343, it's immediately a bit more plush than the Fiesta. We get these lovely tombstone seats with the built-in headrests and infinite adjustability this time rather than 5 points. Stepping inside, and we are greeted with another brown plastic dashboard. But the 343's dashboard, hopefully you can tell, is actually a little bit squishy. I think it's a metal frame underneath with this kind of rubberized plastic put on top. The problem with that is that if you left them out in the heat for too long, the dashboards would sort of warp and become wavy and distorted. This one, thankfully, is in very good condition. Looking at the instrument cluster, we definitely have a lot more information going on here than in the Fiesta. So we have a speedometer on the right hand side, although this time the odometer goes up to 6 digits. So Volvo thought you might actually get more than 99,000 miles out of your 343. We have a fuel gauge, temperature gauge, a voltage gauge for the battery, and then we have a big bank of warning lights in the bottom here, which include 2 different ones for the indicators left and right. We've got dipped beams, we've got handbrake on, we've got oil pressure, we've got brake level, we've got choke, we've got seat belts, we've got hazard warning lights, we've got main beams, we've got fog lights, we've got low ratio hold, heated rear window and the other indicator. Phew, quite a lot there. The secondary controls on the 343 are split between these buttons here on the left hand side, which is lights, side lights, heated rear window and fog light. And then in the middle we've got the heater controls which are on these sliders. And I must say this panel here looks really very homemade. I have to say we've got a slidery fan there, and that distributes the heat on the right hand side of the car and on the left hand side of the car, so that's a bit of a bonus. You can change whether you want heat to the face or to the floor or something, in the passenger side and the driver's side separately. And then we've got the heat control here, hot and cold. We have a clock, it's exciting, and we have a massive ashtray, of course. We also have dedicated space in the car centre console for a radio. This car happens to have one fitted. Down the middle we have the Varimatic controls, or the CVT controls. So this is the gear lever for park, reverse, neutral and drive. That is the hazard warning light, and that is the low ratio hold, which keeps the gearbox in the low gear if you're descending some hills. On the right hand side we have quite a big glove box that opens up and has an ability to hide things away, which is a bit better than the Fiesta. Ventilation is actually a very similar story to the Fiesta. We have a vent on both sides of the dash and some windscreen vents and nothing at all in the middle. So yeah, the ventilation in this is actually just about as poor as the Fiesta. And so yeah, the Fiesta is probably a little bit better as it has that fresh air vent in the middle, which is missing from the 343. We again have a dim dip rear view mirror. We have a pair of sun visors, one of which has gone slightly mouldy from the old garage where this was stored. We've got perforated vinyl headlining, and we've got some grab handles this time for all the passengers, 2 in the rear and 1 in the front. And the courtesy light is located above the driver's door. Again, the windows have quarter lights, which don't open. To get into the back, we get to see the 343's party trick, which is that the seats fold diagonally towards the middle of the car, which gives you a much greater amount of space to get into the back of the car. The seats themselves do have a little storage pocket too, a map storage pocket, which is rather nice touch. And the rear seat is again a little bit more moulded than the Fiestas, but is generally a pretty flat bench, a couple of armrests and no seat belts. Not an awful lot going on in the back there. Of course an ashtray over there, but you know, it was the 70s. Looking at the boot of the 343, you can see that this one has a bustle tail, which means that it definitely is going to have a lot more storage capacity than the Fiesta and kind of brings it up into that class above. We also have a separate lock and handle for the boot, which means you can leave it unlocked. That's the unlocked position. Unlocked, it would be vertical. So I can just press that and open the boot, revealing a big old hatchback area there. Now, the interesting thing about Volvo 340s is that the parcel shelf doesn't actually go up with the tailgate like in most normal hatchbacks. It actually stays in place but hinges backwards like that. The boot itself on this particular car has these kind of storage boxes, but it's actually very capacious. You can get an awful lot of stuff into the boot of a 343. There is also a boot light, which has fallen off on this car, but it does have one, unlike the Fiesta. Again, the seats will fold flat on this one, and the parcel shelf can be removed in order to make it a sort of mini estate, but it's not, I have to say, as quick and efficient to do that as it is on the Fiesta, because this parcel shelf is quite annoying to manoeuvre out of the car. You've seen me drive the Fiesta in a few other videos recently, so I'm not going to drive it again here. But essentially, in terms of its character, it is very kind of raw and raucous, quite sporty, quite fast, and goes around corners really well. It's actually quite a nice driver's car. However, you haven't seen me drive the 343 in a very long time, so I think let's get the camera set up and we'll get the 343 out on the road and you can experience what a Varimatic transmission is like. So I'm really hoping that the audio can pick up exactly the sounds that this car makes. It makes a little whistle when it's cruising. The engine speed changes quite a lot with the Varimatic transmission. It's really very quirky. Let me tell you a little bit about the Varimatic. So as I slow down, I'm just lifting my foot off the accelerator. The gearing means that the engine revs rise, which seems really strange because all you're doing is slowing down. You'd think that the engine would also slow down with you, but it doesn't. Pickup is a little bit jerky, and the reason the pickup is a tiny bit jerky is that this car actually has a ordinary friction clutch as if it was a manual. So although it is an automatic to some extent in that you don't change gear, the nature of the system and the way it's designed means that it doesn't have creep, and therefore you have to hold it on the handbrake on a hill, for example, because otherwise it'll roll back, and that's highly unusual for an automatic. The ride in the 343 is much softer than in the Fiesta. It goes round corners reasonably well, but it really soaks up the bumps. There's also the issue of the 50-50 weight distribution with rear-wheel drive, but the transmission is actually under the rear seats, so it is surprisingly more balanced than you might think. You can really hear the engine revs rising as the car slows down there. It's very strange. Takes a lot of getting used to. So you really rev this car, and then you kind of hold back on the accelerator a little bit, and it reaches its sort of overdrive gearing. It's really very sweet, so you think it's extremely raucous, and then just ease back as you get to the speed you want to, and it all just comes into a lovely balance, into a lovely variomatic balance. It's very kind of poetic in some ways. This also feels way, way bigger than the Fiesta. There's so much more space, it feels much more luxurious. It also feels more plush in terms of the cabin. There's a lot more sound insulation here, so you do feel like you're in something that's a little bit more of a premium product than the Fiesta. Well, there we have it. We are back in the 343, and that is the end of this video. I hope that you've enjoyed this little trip down memory lane to what was new in February 1977. Yes, they are slightly different classes of car, but as I said, they do have some similarities, being the first car for those manufacturers in that particular market sector going downwards. How did they fare, though, in the long run? How does history judge them? Well, the 343 is a little bit of an oddball. Very few of the very early cars survive, and by the mid-80s it looked almost entirely different. They're not terribly popular, but they can command a bit of value if the right car comes along in really good condition. The Fiesta, on the other hand, has universal appeal. Absolutely everyone has a memory of a Fiesta and utterly loves it. And so in today's market, they're actually quite hot property, particularly if you go for a sporty waddle like an XR2 or an S. Looking more generally at the life of the two models though, the Fiesta Mark I continued until 1983, where it received a heavy facelift to become the Mark II, which lasted until 1989. The 343 during its life received a number of changes, not least the change of name to a 340 and 360 if it had a 2-litre engine. There was also a 1.7 engine, a saloon body and a manual offered, and so it became a very comprehensive range of mid-sized cars, and they continued in production until 1991. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please do let me know in the comments if you have any memories about these two cars, in particular early 340s, 343s, 345s. I'd really like hearing about them. I've had loads of memories shared to me about the Fiesta over the last few videos, and I really enjoyed reading those and sharing in your reminiscing and your memories. A lot of people dismiss these as very ordinary cars and not true classics, but for me they are the true classic because they are the sort of car that you had when you were growing up. Your grandparents had them, your friends from school might have had them, it might have been your first car. And I love that my cars trigger those memories in you who view these videos, and it's why I make them. So go ahead, share away, I look forward to reading them, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye.